Okay, thanks. Thanks, Brother John, and good evening, everyone. We've got a very exciting topic tonight, Antichrist, and looking at the question of whether most Christians are about to make a huge mistake. But before you start thinking that you may be going crazy or having some sort of deja vu, we have done this before. We did it but we did it on a Wednesday, so maybe some people may have missed it. And it ties in really well with this public lecture series that you're doing on Bible prophecy and the return of Christ. So I was asked to do it again. And either way, even if you have heard it, somebody's going to be happy, right? Either you'll be happy because you forgot everything that I said and you want to hear it again, or I'll be happy because you've remembered it, and that means I must have done a decent job. So, as I was saying, this is a very important topic because the consequences of getting the subject wrong are so huge, and it's important to be reminded of it, and it fits in so well because of the relevance for us today. And I have tweaked a few things since last time, so keep your eyes peeled for anything new. And I think this is also really interesting because it's a real life example of why it matters what you believe, right? It's very easy to think that all we really need to do is believe in God, love Jesus, and do good, be kind to people, and that's it, right? That should be all we need. But we know right from the start that God made it very clear that it really does matter to him what you believe, and you have to worship him in the way that he wants you to, not in the way that you want to worship or think is right. Right from the start, Adam and Eve, for example, they believed in God, they loved God, but because they didn't listen to what he said and they ate the tree of knowledge and good and evil, they got kicked out of the garden, they got condemned to death, and there's lots of consequences of that. And then their descendants as well, right? You got Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel both loved God. They both wanted to bring sacrifices to God, but Cain wanted to bring the sacrifice that he wanted to give to God, not the sacrifice that God asked for, and so he was rejected because of that. So it's the same for us today. We can't say we love God if we don't work as hard as we can to try to figure out what the truth of his word really is saying to us, because otherwise, how can we know if we're doing what God says if we don't truly read his word? And because it's been so long since Jesus walked this earth, there's a whole lot of time for people to come up with all kinds of false doctrines and crazy things that take quite a while to sort of untangle and make sure that we're not being deceived by. So what about this subject is so dangerous? Well, if anyone has, I guess I'll ask a question first. Has anyone heard of the Left Behind series? I've got a sort of picture up there. A couple people, that's good. Hopefully, because I did say this last time, so hopefully everyone should remember. But I think more people would probably be familiar with this one, the Chosen series. That's quite popular. And basically, the same group that did this series about 15, 20 years ago did a series on Left Behind. And instead of being about Jesus and his life and whatnot, it was about this end times idea of what's going to happen just before Jesus' return. And it was very popular. Probably not quite as popular as the Chosen series, but very, very popular, especially over in North America. It sold, the books sold 80 million copies worldwide. It had a whole bunch of things that spawned off it, like kids' books and graphic novels, video games, a whole bunch of stuff. And apparently it was generating $100 million a year just in all that stuff. And then they even made a Hollywood movie on it based on the book series starring Nicolas Cage in 2014. And then this one here was a newer one that was sort of a sequel to that movie. So it's quite popular and it's out there for a lot of people are across it. So what's the problem? Well, in this Left Behind series, it graphically portrays the most common sort of Christian view of what the Antichrist is. And not only is it completely wrong, but it's also extremely dangerous. and I'll go through what their views are as sort of outlined in this series of books. And I think as we go through them, you'll very quickly realize why this is such a dangerous thing. So if you haven't seen this before, it's bad. So here's what the majority of Christians today believe about Antichrist and what Antichrist will do. So they believe that Antichrist is a future diabolical leader. So he's coming soon. He hasn't been here yet. He's coming soon, and he's possessed by the devil, or at least has supernatural powers from the devil. They believe that Antichrist will appear right before the return of Jesus, and shortly after the armed forces of Russia are miraculously destroyed in Israel. They believe that he'll start as a peacemaker and tell the world to disarm. The Jews are going to be prominent in welcoming and supporting him, and he's going to be responsible for a Middle East peace agreement with Israel and our enemies. Number 6, or 8, sorry, what did I miss 6? Oh, my list is different than that one. Number 6, he rebuilds a temple in Jerusalem. He makes a covenant with the Jews. He allows the Jews to return to the law of Moses and make animal sacrifices. He performs superhuman signs, wonders, and miracles. He claims to be Jesus or God. The world will be commanded to worship him. He will put down all opposition to his rulership. He establishes one world government and religion, and he appears to be immortal. So I'm sure after going through that list, you sort of picked up what the issue is. This is an exact description of what we think Jesus is going to do, or we know Jesus is going to do when he returns. Not Antichrist, Jesus. And so this is crazy, right? If all these Christians think that Antichrist is going to do this, and they see Jesus come back and he's doing all these things, they're going to think that he's the Antichrist. And they're going to say to everybody, well, we got to band together, we got to go up, we got to oppose this thing, we got to fight against this Antichrist, because that will show that we're true believers, and Jesus will come back and save us and deliver us from this Antichrist. So as far as I've been able to research, this is the most common Christian view on the subject, and it will probably get even more popular as soon as some of these things start happening, because they'll say, okay, look, maybe some of these first things start happening. What we've said is coming to pass. What we predicted is correct, and so they'll start getting people on board. And maybe even people who aren't Christian, but start hearing some of this hype will join in. Because when Jesus returns, that will be a shocking event for the world, right? When they see Jesus come back and doing all these superhuman things, the world will be their attention will be directed to that, absolutely. And they'll be looking around for explanations. They'll be trying to find out, who can tell us what's going on, who can tell us what this is. And if this big group of Christians start saying, this is what we predicted 20 years ago, believe us that we're correct, everyone will be impressed with how accurate what they've said is going to happen, and they'll probably go along with it. And so the whole world is going to be joined up in this big frenzy to fight against Christ, and the battle of Armageddon will begin. So basically, Christians are setting themselves up for maybe the biggest, most tragic mistake in the history of the world. The Jews rejected Christ the first time he was here, and now the Christians are going to reject him when he comes back, which is crazy. The very people whose name means that they're supposed to be followers of Christ are going to be gathering together to fight against him when he returns. So how did that possibly happen? How could we have got to this crazy sort of place? Well, it started about, oops, got ahead of me here. All right. About 500 years ago during the Protestant Reformation. So once the Bible became accessible to public or to normal people, once the printing press was invented and it was a bit easier to get your hands on a copy of the Bible, suddenly the Catholic Church wasn't able to control who could read the Bible and who couldn't. Previously it was written in Latin, services were in Latin, and so most common people had to sort of depend on the church for any information about the Bible. But once people could read it in their own language, people like Martin Luther and some of the other Protestants started reading the Bible, and finding a lot of differences between what the church was saying the Bible said and what the Bible actually said. And the famous example, of course, is Martin Luther's 95 Theses that he nailed on the door of the church in 1517. And all of these sort of fledgling Bible scholars soon started seeing even more sinister things about the church. Not only had they gotten a couple things wrong over the years and maybe, misunderstood some stuff, they had ties to the little horn of Daniel 7, they had ties to the harlot of Revelation, the man of sin, the Antichrist. And so there's this quote here from someone named David Whitford in The Papal Antichrist, and he writes, in 1520, Martin Luther's view of the papacy shifted dramatically and permanently, while the events of 1519 played a role in his evolving view of the papacy as the Antichrist, forecast by the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians. Lorenzo Valla's discourse helped convince Luther that the Pope was the Antichrist. So this is obviously a major problem for the church, right? If you're trying to tell everyone that you're God's most faithful church, and people are saying, well, no, you're actually the Antichrist, that's going to be a problem. That's a little bit counterproductive to your goal. And so, of course, the church tried to stamp this out. They tortured people, they killed people, they burned Bibles, everything they could do, but this movement just kept gathering momentum and couldn't be stopped. And so they decided, well, if we can't physically destroy the idea, then we need to come up with some different interpretations. So they commissioned two of their best scholars, two guys one called Francisco Ribera and one called Luis del Alcazar. I probably not pronounced that right. But they were two Jesuit priests, and they commissioned them to come up with different interpretations of Antichrist and these other prophecies in the Bible. So Alcazar founded something called the Praetorist School, which attempted to push all the events of Revelation into the past. So either talking about AD 70 or the fall of pagan Rome. And then the other guy, Ribera, founded the Futurist School. So he said, all right, let's push all the events of Revelation into the future and say none of it's happened yet. It's all a prophecy of the end times. And so therefore, any teachings in Revelation that people were saying, oh, this must be the church, well, it can't be the church because it's either in the future or in the past. And so they conveniently shifted the blame. So he looked at prophecies. He looked at prophecies like we do, and he twisted them. So, for example, the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel 9 about Jesus, he interprets it the same way that we do up until Jesus is crucified, and then he inserts this church age right in the middle here. He says, I'm going to put this little gap in the middle of the prophecy, even though it's the next words of the next verse. Nope, there's going to be a 2,000-year gap. And the rest of the prophecy is not talking about Jesus anymore. Now it's talking about the Antichrist. And so Ribera's interpretation gained the most momentum. People started thinking that this sounded good. And not only did it persuade Catholics to not leave the church, it also corrupted the Protestants. And now, as we saw in the previous slide, the very people pushing this idea of this futuristic Antichrist are the Protestant churches. They've been so swept up and deceived by these ideas that they've completely forgotten that their roots and the reason they're called Protestants is because they were protesting against this. And this theory was dreamt up by a Jesuit priest. So we'll go through some evidence against why these are wrong in a second, but just the fact that the Catholic Church was able to pull this grand deception off is amazing, right? It brings to mind the verse, Revelation 17, verse 8, where it says, "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is." So that's exactly what happened with the Protestant Revolution, right? The Catholic Church was there. It was the dominant force. The Protestant Revolution happened. They should have got dealt a death blow, right? It it was obvious from the Bible that they were the Antichrist, and somehow they managed to resurrect themselves and trick people into thinking that they weren't. Which is one of the reasons why God is going to judge the false church so harshly, right? They're just willing to lie and deceive and do whatever it takes to make people happy and keep listening to them. They don't actually care about truth. They don't actually care about what the Bible says. They have no integrity, and they lead people astray. So now the beast has resurrected itself, and with the descendants of the Reformers and the Protestants, instead of sounding the alarm about who the true Antichrist is, they're going to be joining sides with the Antichrist to fight against the true Christ. So I guess the question would be, if we know any Christians who do believe this idea, and we're worried that they're going to join in with this and make this terrible mistake, well, how would we show them from the Bible that this is incorrect? So let's go through a couple quick points to show how this futurist idea is wrong and who the actual Antichrist is. And number one, right from the start, the futurist view has this fundamental flaw because it only works if the Antichrist has supernatural power, so that he's able to do all these things that we know are actually prophecies about Jesus. And the only way that he can get the supernatural power is if he's possessed by the devil, or he has this power given to him by the devil. And so if you don't believe that there is a supernatural devil, then the Antichrist theory doesn't work at all. Because if there's no other power in the universe other than God, then there's no supernatural power that can be in opposition to God. And so the Antichrist theory falls over as soon as you can prove to them that there's no such thing as a supernatural devil. So that's number one. And right away, I mean, that's all you need, really. You could show them that this view is incorrect. But let's continue. So you'd think with all this fantastical ideas about the Antichrist and end times and all this, you might be surprised that it's only actually directly mentioned 5 times in the whole Bible, and all the times are in the epistles of John. So the word Antichrist is not found anywhere else in the Bible except in the epistles of John, and in those epistles it only appears 5 times. In the first reference here, in 1 John 2, verse 18, John tells us that the Antichrist is plural. So there's many Antichrists. It's not just the singular diabolical end times leader. And John also says that there was already Antichrists in his day. Many Antichrists have come already. The Antichrists are already there. Antichrist has already existed 2,000 years ago. And then also John mentions that the Antichrist went out from us. So the Antichrist originated in the true church and was part of a falling away from the true church. Then in verse 22, John tells us how to identify Antichrist. So Antichrist is someone who denies the Father and the Son. And then finally, in 1 John 4, there's one final passage in 2 John, but it says pretty much the same thing as this one here. John gives us a bit more detail about specifically what Antichrists are denying, and he says they're denying that Jesus has come in the flesh. So that's it. Those are the only direct references to Antichrist. Anything about supernatural or diabolical or end times. None of that you get from the biblical references to Antichrist. So if we just quickly summarize then, number one, Antichrist is not diabolical or can't be diabolical or supernatural, because there is no such thing as a supernatural devil. Number two, Antichrist is not only futuristic or singular, because of those verses we saw there in 1 John. Number three, Antichrist existed in the first century and were initially believers who then left the ecclesia. And finally, Antichrist does not confess that Jesus came in the flesh. So we can see there it has nothing to do with this idea of a future dictator who saves Israel from northern invaders, sets up a temple, sets up a one-world government, any of that stuff. So let's look a little bit deeper into some clues to try to get some more information about Antichrist. So if we break down that first, the third reference we looked at, 1 John chapter 4, there's two key words here. So the first one is confesses, and the second one is flesh. So confesses in this verse is the Greek word, Strong's number 3670, which means to assent, to covenant, to acknowledge, or to promise. So this is a very strong word. It's talking about a very firm belief, not something that is wishy-washy. So this is something we might call like an important doctrine or fundamental belief. And then the second one, flesh, is Greek word, is Strong's number 4561, which means human nature with both its frailties, physically and morally, and passions. So if we look at some places where these words are used, the second word there, Strong's number 4561, is used in a couple passages here that we can look at, and hopefully, and maybe this can give us a better understanding of what this word is talking about. So, in Romans chapter 7, in verse 5 and 18, it says, "For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions were at work to bear fruit for death. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out." So this is saying that flesh is the human nature inside of us. That's what it's talking about. And it's the thing that causes us to sin. It's that little voice in our head that wants to do the wrong thing. It's our lusts, our passions, our instincts, our tendencies towards sin. And then Romans 8, in verse 3, 5, and 6 says, "God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace." So this passage is saying that Jesus had the same flesh. He had the same human nature as us, the same temptations, the same tendencies. Jesus faced the same battle that all of us do. He just never gave into it. And then the last one here in Hebrews says, and this is talking about Jesus again, "Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he also himself likewise partook of the same. He had to be made like his brothers in every respect, for because he himself has suffered, being tempted, he is able to help those who are tempted." And then Hebrews 4 and verse 14 to 16, "Jesus, the Son of God, was in every respect tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we might receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." So I don't think Paul could have been any more clear with this, right? He was clearly going to great lengths to emphasize this point. He says, he also himself likewise took part of the same. He's saying Jesus had human nature. He was not a God. He had the same flesh as we did. He was tempted. He could have sinned. And that's the whole point. That's the victory that he accomplished. If he couldn't have sinned, then there was no victory. It was just a charade. And because of what Jesus did, he can fulfill his mediator between us and God, because he understands flesh, he understands us, so he can sympathize with us and help us. But he overcame sin, and so because he never gave into it, and so he destroyed the power of sin. So this is the key differentiator. Antichrist came out of the true ecclesia, and what differentiated these Antichrist people, this Antichrist movement that left the true ecclesia, was that they denied the Father and the Son, and they denied that Jesus came in the flesh. They denied that he had human nature like we do. And then finally, the last main one we'll look at is 2 Peter 2, verse 3, which says, "But false prophets also arose among you, just as there will be false teachers who secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them. Many will follow their sensuality, and in their greed they will exploit you with false words." So you can see in this passage, he doesn't specifically mention Antichrist. As I said, Antichrist only appears in 1 John, but you can see some very similar wording, talking about a movement leaving the first ecclesia. They talked about the false doctrine involving denying the master who bought them. And then Peter also adds here that it's a greedy movement. It's all about money. It's all about setting up teachers having itching ears, right? People that are happy to say whatever the people want them to hear or want them to say, so that they can get more money coming in and get rich off it. Okay, now there's a whole bunch of other things that the Bible tells us about this movement. And these things paint such a detailed and specific picture of who it is that it's almost impossible not to realize who the Bible is talking about. Now, these references use different terms to refer to the same system, and we don't have time to go into proving exactly that each of these different things all relate to the same system, but we can talk about that after if you want. But some of the terms that are used in these passages are the man of sin, the woman riding the beast, the little horn of Daniel 7, the mother of harlots, a falling away, and the false prophet. So if we look at the first one here, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul talks about this man of sin. So in verse 3 and 4, Paul says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." So just like in 1 John, we're told here that this system is involved in a falling away from the true ecclesia. So it originated in the early ecclesia, but it fell away and it opposes God. So it's anti-God or antichrist. And the extra detail that this passage gives is that whoever the system is claim to rule from God's temple and claim to rule on behalf of God. And if we jump down to verse 9 of that same chapter, we're told that the system is all about deception, things that deceive. So we're told in verse 9, it says, "Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders." So it's a system that's steeped in lies and deception. Next, if we move to Daniel 7, 1 Timothy first, 1 Timothy 4, verse 2 and 3. Is that right? No, Daniel 7. My slides are old. Daniel 7 in verse 25. So Daniel 7 talks about the little horn that comes out of the fourth beast. So this is the beast of that Daniel had the dream of. So he had the dream of the four beasts, and the fourth beast is the beast that represents the Roman Empire. And this little horn comes up after the Roman Empire is established and uproots three other horns. And we're told that this horn isn't about power or physical strength because it's smaller than the other horns. This horn comes to preeminence because of what it says. It says this horn has a mouth speaking great things and eyes like a man. That's in verse 8 of Daniel 7. And once again, similar to the Antichrist system, it opposes God. In verse 25, we find that it also persecutes the true believers. It says that the little horn shall speak pompous words against the Most High and shall persecute the saints of the Most High. Then in Revelation 17, verse 6, which is talking about the mother of harlots, also confirms that the system persecutes the true believers. So Revelation 17, verse 6, it says, "I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration." So drunken with the blood of the saints. There couldn't really be anything more anti-Jesus than that, right? You've killed so many of Jesus' disciples that you're drunk with the blood of his disciples. That's about as bad as it gets. And then over one page in chapter 18, Revelation 18, verse 24, it says, "And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all of them that were slain on the earth." So definitely a system that persecutes believers. Now, quickly back to the little horn, we're told in Daniel 8, verse 11, that it destroys the temple. Daniel 8, verse 11, destroys the temple, which was fulfilled in AD 70. It says, "Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down." And then 1 Timothy 4, verse 2 to 3, we're told, Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats. So dietary regulations and celibacy, which the Catholic Church is known well for and has caused some issues in the past. And it goes on to say, which God has created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. Now this this passage here, once again, doesn't say Antichrist, but it talks about this idea of a falling away, and the biggest, I guess, falling away from the first century church was the system that we know as the Catholic Church, the false church. And then if we go back to Revelation again, in Revelation 17, we find that the woman riding the beast, which is also the same system, has global influence. So Revelation 17, verse 2, it says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And a couple verses down, verse 4, it says, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So the system is very wealthy. It likes to wear colors like you can see in the background of this slide. It's a little bit dark, but he is wearing scarlet in that picture. And this is an interesting one here. trades the souls of men. So at the end, in Revelation 18, at the end of verse 13, it says that that one of the things the system trades is the souls of men. Now, obviously, we don't believe in the immortal soul, but it's pretty amazing that the King James Version and even the New King James Version translate it this way. Most modern translations try to soften this, and they change it to human lives, or I think the ESV says human souls. But the Greek word that is translated soul or human or souls of men in the King James is translated soul 58 out of the 105 times that it's used in the King James Version. And it's really a perfect description of the kind of corrupt practices that the church engaged in, right? They love to make money off people's spiritual lives, right? They were happy to abuse their power as the conduit to God to make money. In fact, before the Protestant Revolution, the church used to sell indulgences, which were literally trading in human souls. They'd tell people that if you paid us money, we could get your relative or friend or whatever's soul, dead relative's soul, out of purgatory if you give us enough money. So they were trading in human souls, I guess, in that sense. And then the next verse there, Revelation 17, verse 5, it's associated with mystery. It says, upon her forehead was the name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So the system is known as a mother or mother church, you might say, and has harlot daughters that have gone along with its false doctrine in that verse there. The next one, the woman sits on 7 mountains. So Revelation 17, verse 9, it says, and here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. So when Rome was founded, there were 7 hills all close together that each had their own little settlements on them, and those 7 settlements merged together to form one city, which is Rome as we know it now. And historically, Rome has been known as the city of 7 hills. So this is clearly a reference to Rome. And then finally, the last one here, Antichrist will be destroyed by Jesus at his coming. So 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 8 says, and then that wicked one shall be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. So God hates this system more than anything else in the world. And they will receive the full force of his judgment when Jesus returns. That'll be Jesus' top priority, is to bring judgment on the system that's either persecuted or killed or deceived so many of Jesus' children. So going through this list and looking at all these connections, I think we would agree that Martin Luther and some of the other protesters were 100% correct, that the Antichrist is none other than the Roman Catholic Church and all of those that have been corrupted by her false doctrine. And of course this is the Antichrist. What else could the Antichrist be? What could be more anti-Jesus than the system that has led astray so many of Jesus' sheep? When Jesus was on the earth, he forgave adulterers and fornicators and tax collectors, but people who caused his little ones to offend, it says it was better that a millstone was hanged about their neck and they were cast into the sea. So that's Jesus' top priority, is protecting his little ones and his disciples. And if all that's not enough, it's so critically important to God that people identify the system that he's actually built into the very geography of this planet a clue to identify the Antichrist. He's shaped the landmass of the world so that it makes it impossible that there's any doubt as to who the system is. Because as we mentioned before, this system does more damage to God and to God's people than any other anti-God system on the planet, right? If you think about, whoever it is, the false church has done the most damage, while at the same time claiming to be God's most important supporters, which is crazy, right? It literally couldn't get any worse. They couldn't get any further from the truth. On the one hand, they claim to be the preeminent church of God and God's biggest supporters, the most dedicated, the most supportive, the most like Jesus, when in fact they're God's biggest enemy, his number one opponent. That's the most unchristlike you could possibly be, which is incredible. It's incredible to think that it's even possible for something like that to happen, and yet we've seen it happen right before our eyes. And so God's done everything that he can to help us identify them. So if you look at this here, look at this image of Daniel 2, we know that this image represents the system that's going to be destroyed by Jesus that is coming, right? Jesus is the rock here that's going to smash the image, going to smash the feet of iron and clay, which is the fourth beast of Daniel 7, which is the man of sin of 2 Thessalonians, which is the Antichrist of 1 John, the mother of harlots, everything that we've been talking about tonight. And if you look at this picture and you think about sort of where in the world a piece of land that looks kind of like this would be, right? This leg and foot and a stone coming about to smash the toes of the foot. Well, looks just like Italy, right? I've always thought that Italy was a foot kicking a ball, but it's not. It's actually a leg with a foot and a stone coming to smash the toes, just like Daniel's image. So there you go. As we all know, of course, Italy is the home of the Roman Catholic Church. So even if someone gets tricked by all the church's lies about who the Antichrist is or isn't, that's one thing they definitely can't hide. If you can just grab a map of the world and look for where the stone smashing the image is, then you found the system that Jesus is going to destroy when he returns, the Antichrist. So God couldn't have made it any more clear. So what's going to happen? Well, when Jesus returns and starts doing all these things that we know the Bible prophesies that he will do, the Catholics and the Christians have predicted that that's what Antichrist will do. And so they'll say, look, everyone, this is checking everything off our list, exactly what we said is going to happen. This is exactly what the Bible says the Antichrist is going to do. So this must be him. So come on, everyone, let's get together, let's rally around, let's go up to Jerusalem, and let's depose of this impostor. And of course, when they do that, that will bring about the greatest disaster and destruction our world has ever seen. It will result in Armageddon. And as I sort of mentioned before, the unbelievable tragedy and irony of this whole situation is incredible, right? God's greatest judgment, other than the flood, that will come on this earth is not going to be because of the atheists or the progressives or the Nazis or any other kind of terrible group of people that you could think would be the most wicked people that God would have to come and judge. It's going to come because of the group that calls on his name, the group that has temples and churches and cathedrals dedicated to God and to Jesus, the ones that have figures of his son hanging on the cross and stained glass pictures of Bible stories. And in a final piece of irony, the very group that goes up to fight against Jesus, claiming that they're opposing the Antichrist, will find out that in doing so, they're showing themselves to be the true Antichrist. So, as I mentioned at the start, this is a great example of why it matters what you believe and why it matters that we search out the Bible, that we really figure out what it's saying and don't go along with whatever the most popular opinion is of what the Bible says. And we're incredibly blessed to be given the heritage that we have that has shown us the lies of the false church, because obviously they're very good at lying. They've deceived a lot of people. You know, if circumstances had been different, if any of us had been born into different families or went to different schools, it's possible we could have been deceived by these lies, by the lies of Antichrist, and found ourselves going along with this group that is going to go up and fight against Jesus. And so I think we really need to have compassion for people who have been deceived by the system and try to get the message out to them and try to reach them before it's too late. And this is exactly the message that Jesus leaves for us in Revelation 18, verse 4. He says, "Come out of her, my people. Come out of the false church, distance ourselves completely from it so that we're not judged with it." Thanks.